Hey everybody, how's it going today? Things going well, going poorly. We're getting close to being done, so that's a good thing. Anyway, today we're going to talk about air pollution a little bit and understanding some of the impacts and solutions that have gone on over the years. We have to realize that while our pollution is bad right now, I'm not going to say it's great with the air pollution, but it's a lot better than it was 50 years ago, even 100 years ago. The Industrial Revolution really started contaminating our air supply, basically our environment, and governments throughout the world have gone a long ways towards correcting some of that, and we still have a long way to go. I'm not going to act like um, air pollution is gone and things like that, because that's not the case. But it is better than it was because we are using some of our technologies and things like that better than it used to be. But we still have a long way to go to clean some things up and do a better job of taking care of what needs to be taken care of. All right, so today's lesson objectives are to basically define air pollution, understand what constitutes air pollution, and identify the major pollutants, um, identify the causes. Some are natural and some are human made. Um, it's kind of interesting in the last about 4 or 5 years um, how much it's been judged upon that in particular feedlots and things like that, and how much pollution is coming from them. And I'm talking air pollution just because of methane gases that are being released in the atmosphere, or what we know as flatulence. Somebody, well, in this case, cattle farting. So there's some of that as well. We need to also talk about how air pollution affects our respiratory, cardiovascular, and overall health. Those of us that get to live out in the country um, have a few less air pollute air pollutant causing problems. And then we're going to talk about exploring some solutions to help reduce air pollution. And I'm going to try to get you guys to kind of help me out with this a little bit. All right. So basically, our introduction is there is a global health crisis due to air pollution. It impacts millions worldwide. It's the leading cause of premature deaths annually. Again, we, especially here in the United States, we are doing better than we were 50, 70, 100 years ago. I mean, it's gradually gotten better, but with that said, we are far from perfect. We need to really worry about the air we breathe and how it affects our daily life um, and our long term well being. I live in Kansas, basically in what is known as the Flint Hills, which is the um, largest tall grass prairie left in the world. And every spring they burn the pastures. It's basically cattle country. They go in and burn the pastures off to rejuvenate the grasses and things like that. But you can definitely tell the air quality changes immensely in late March, early April here in Kansas, just because of burning off grass. So, and that's not burning coal and things like that on an everyday basis. Now, with that said, it is a large amount of material that gets burnt very rapidly. So we kind of have to deal with some of that. All right. So, first question. Somebody want to put in the chat or jump on the mic, video, whatever, and tell me what air pollution is? Give me a good definition of air pollution. Anybody? Come on, somebody's got to be able to throw me a bone here. Oh, that's a very short and concise definition, but I appreciate that, Isaiah. Contamination of the air, that is definitely a very concise definition and very poignant. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to make it any simpler than that. So, but by definition, air pollution means harmful contaminants in our atmosphere, which include dust, fumes, gases, smoke, or vapor. These pollutants exist as concentrations that harm health and the environment. So with that said, we can also think about this in terms of air pollution in what we would call macro and micro environments. In macro environments, we're talking about the atmosphere in general, the area around a city like Denver, Phoenix, places like that. When we talk about micro, we could talk about what we live in our household, jobs where we work, things like that. I know I went through some heavy air pollution when I was going to college because while going to college, I worked at a meat packing plant, and the break rooms and things like that, about everybody in the plant smoked. And it was the cafeteria, things like that were always very smoky. I think some of that has changed in the last 15, 20 years, but this was 35 years ago, 40 years ago now, and everybody smoked, and it was basically polluting the micro environment, the cafeteria, the break rooms, things like that. They obviously were not allowed to smoke when they were out on the line cutting meat and things of that nature. Okay, some common pollutants are particulate matter, and particulate matter can be dust. If you live near a feedlot or something like that, it could be fecal material. Particle matter can be some of the things that cause you allergies, plant pollen, things like that, or what we're talking about when we talk about particulate matter. Nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide are all things that are created by the burning of fossil fuels and things like that. Ground level ozone. Ozone is very necessary for us because we have to have the ozone to help protect us from the sun, but that needs to be in the upper atmosphere. When we talk about ground level ozone, O3 just means it's added an extra oxygen atom to the oxygen molecule that we breathe. That stuff can be very harmful to the human body. And that's part of the reason why it gets used for cleaning bacteria and things like that, because it has that extra oxygen that it can release very easily and oxidizes materials and can kill off bacteria, viruses, things like that. I grew up next to a little town. Well, I call it a little town. It was a big town for us. It was about 30,000 people, of Emporia, Kansas, and it has one of the best water treatment facilities in the world. I mean, they win awards with it every year, and they use ozone to actually clean the bacteria and viruses and things like that out of the water that they're pulling out of the river. They inundate it with O3, and that helps kill off the bacteria and things like that, which is probably pretty important when you're in cattle country and you know what cattle do in the river. All right. Next question. What causes air pollution? Anybody want to throw out a few ideas? All right, Isaiah. Yeah, I appreciate you. Cars. Anybody else want to throw something out there? I know there's not a lot of us here today, but we need to continue grinding on. All right. Well, if not, I'll go through the factories. Yeah, that's true too. Basically, number one is fossil fuel combustion, burning coal, oil, or gas for energy and transportation. Power plants and vehicles are major contributors to air pollution. Industrial processes, factories, things like that emit various pollutants. Metal processing create hazardous byproducts. That's why along the East Coast you see a lot more problems with air pollutants, is because that's where a lot of our metal processing goes on, in the Pennsylvania area, things like that. Agricultural activities, that's what the area that I live in, we see an awful lot of that. Fertilizers release ammonia into the air. Livestock produces methane. Burning crop residues creates smoke as well. A lot of people in Kansas, when they get done harvesting the wheat and things like that, they will burn off their wheat fields. As I was talking about earlier, they burn off pastures to get the grass to grow more, but by doing that, they create smoke, and smoke is air pollution. And then finally, there are some natural sources such as volcanic eruptions, forest fires, dust storms can contribute pollutants, sea spray can add salt particles to coastal air, things like that. So we have to understand that air pollution not only is man-made, but it in ways can be created by natural sources as well. I mean, clear to the point that it had natural sources like volcanic eruptions have caused ice ages and things like that. There's been enough material put in the air that volcanic ash actually causes the temperature of the earth to drop a little bit. Basically, the last volcanic eruption, I don't know how many of you know that Yellowstone National Park is basically a huge volcano, but it's basically, that's what it is a huge caldera. And basically, even where I live, they say if that volcano ever erupts like it did the last time, that I live about 800 miles away from it, and they say that where I live would be under 4 foot of ash falling from the sky, because if it were to erupt like it did the last time, it would literally put that much smoke and ash into the atmosphere, and would take years for the material to come down out of the atmosphere. And that would cause all sorts of problems, not only with ash falling to the ground, but also temperature changes, things like that. All right, next question. How does air pollution affect health? What does air pollution do that causes us to have health problems? Anybody want to take a stab at that other than Isaiah? Well, okay, if not, we'll kind of move on here. Basically, how it affects your health is, first, pollutants enter through your breathing. They deposit in our airways and in our lungs. That's basically what cigarette smoking, vaping, things like that do as well. You are introducing personally, on a personal level, pollutants into your body. That is something that you could help if you are a smoker or a vapor, dropping that, because you are putting air pollutants into your body. And when you get air pollutants into your lungs in particular, the next step is it's going to move into your bloodstream. It's going to move into your bloodstream just like the oxygen attaches to your red blood cells to move throughout your body. The pollutants inside your lungs are going to do the same thing. So you need to be very aware of that. So those are things to think about. Then when this happens, you have the inflammation response. The body fights foreign particles. This creates inflammation and oxidative stress. That's when you start seeing things like bronchitis and pneumonia and things like that. If you are breathing in a lot of foreign particles, people are more susceptible to bronchitis and pneumonias and things like that, because basically what's happening, that phlegm that you build up is your body trying to fight the pollutants and keep them out of your system, and then force them up through and out of and expel them out of your body by coughing, sneezing, things of that nature. So those are important things to remember as well. Then we get to the systemic spread, and that's what I was talking about earlier. That's when those particles enter your bloodstream and they go to your heart, your brain, actually get into the lung tissues itself. There's a difference between being in the open spaces of your lungs and then getting into the tissues. When it gets into the tissues, that's when you start seeing major problems with like cancers and things of that nature. So what you're breathing affects your health greatly and can seriously affect your health in very bad ways. And that's finally the disease development, where exposure leads to serious conditions, including stroke, COPD, heart disease, and lung cancer. These are all things that you really need to worry about and try to avoid. And these are at a higher rate with people who cause micro pollution in their body by smoking and vaping. So as you can tell, I ask and hope you would not do that. I lost my grandfather when I was 15 years old because he smoked 3 packs a day and he didn't make it to 60 because of that. It's just bad stuff. All right. So someone want to throw out there how we can reduce air pollution? What can we do to help reduce air pollution? And we can do it at all sorts of levels. We can do it at a personal level, a community level, a government level. What can be done about that? I mean, we have activists out there. What are the activists trying to do? Well, they're trying to change policy, government policy in particular. They want to implement stricter emission standards and enforce regulations. And what we mean by enforce regulations is if you're not following what's going on, it's going to cost you, whether it be time in prison or money, things of that nature. So policy solutions, getting our government to change how it's doing things is very important. Industrial innovation, develop cleaner technology and filter emissions. That has happened a lot in the last 50 years. There are much better ways of filtering air coming out of power plants, coal plants, things like that. I live about 50 miles away from the largest coal plant in Kansas called Jeffries Energy Center. And most of what you see coming out of the huge smokestacks, it's called smokestacks, but they're really not smokestacks. They are, but they aren't. Most of what's coming out of there now is steam. So they have figured out how to filter the emissions and remove most of the smoke from the coal burning power plants, and are now, yes, there's a lot of water vapor being released, but water vapor is not dangerous unless you get the sulfur dioxides and things like that in it. And when you get to the sulfur dioxides being added to water, now you're creating sulfuric acid. And back east, when I was you guys' age, sulfuric acid was not in the atmosphere, was basically causing acid rain. And there's been a lot of filtering gone on with that as well to drop the acidic rate of rain back on the East Coast. Community action, promote public transportation and shared resources. We don't see that a lot here in Kansas. There are in some of our larger communities. I'm not going to claim they're huge because other than Wichita and Kansas City, in Kansas, most of our large cities are 125, 130,000, which a lot of people would laugh at. And those are the big ones. And you get down below the top 10 size cities in the state of Kansas and you're below 50,000 real quick. So they're relatively small, but there's still some public transportation goes on, buses, things like that. You get back into the bigger cities like Denver, Phoenix, back on the East Coast, trains, subways, things like that are used a lot more to kind of promote public transportation and limit pollution that way. And then finally, we can make our own individual choices, how we want to go about living our lives, whether we want to recycle or not. Recycling does a great job of helping not only air pollution, but pollution in general. Anytime we can recycle, we're cutting down on air pollution as well as pollution and more land based. So, as we can see, solutions require action at every level, from governmental policies to our own personal habits. Everything has a role in controlling air pollution. Now, some of your personal responsibilities. First of all, transportation, how you choose to move from one place to another, whether you're carpooling or biking or driving your own car. Those are all personal choices, and that is something you have to take responsibility for. I'm not necessarily bashing on people who drive themselves, but with that said, you have to realize that there are going to be some people that are going to be very frustrated with you if you're not carpooling, or if you're within walking distance of work and things like that, of not doing that because they look at the world differently than you do. And I'm not saying one side's right more than the other. It's just, I think that's something we as human beings need to realize, is that our point of view is not always everyone's point of view. And in most cases, it's never going to be. So we really need to learn to accept and change what we can change. And if we don't agree with people, that doesn't mean we need to have a big fight with them or something like that. We just have to sometimes agree to disagree. Energy use, being able to reduce the consumption of energy that we're using. We talked about that a little bit with fossil fuels. If we can reduce that, that will help reduce our air pollution. Things that are a little more environmentally susceptible and prevent a lot of air pollution would be like wind generators, solar panels, things of that nature. They are becoming more and more prevalent throughout our world. We need to support clean air policies and let everybody know about them. And just because things are the way they are doesn't mean we can't do them better. And in a lot of cases, because it will cost a little more money, businesses and things like that don't want to do that. And that's where we have to get policies put in place by the government saying, hey, you will do this or you will not be allowed to make money. That's the big thing. And then finally, consumption, which is we need to reduce our waste, recycle, things like that, support eco-friendly products. Anytime that we can recycle, that's helping air pollution. So our daily choices have a cumulative impact. Small changes by many people can significantly improve our air quality. All right, so air quality monitoring. This becomes important because what is air quality monitoring? Anybody want to throw that out there? Air quality monitoring is just a way of keeping track of what's polluting our air. I mean, this time of year, if you pay close attention to the local news stations, things like that, they will talk about, in the big cities, they'll talk about air quality all the time. Out here where I live, they'll talk about, in particular, pollen counts and things like that, just because people that have allergies, seasonal allergies, need to be aware of how much pollen is in the air and things like that, because that does affect whether they want to be outside or not. So those are important things to recognize. So first of all, we've got to measure it, and we have specialized stations to collect air samples and detect various pollutants. Modern sensors can give real-time data, which is great because now we have the ability to literally, we would have to take air samples, go back to the lab, test them, things like that. When I was your age, now it can be done almost instantaneously, which keeps everything in better tune and check. That goes um, into our process of we take the measurements, then we have to analyze them, and allows us to identify patterns. And in particular, if we start moving some of these things around a little bit, we can kind of figure out where the pollution's coming from and what we can do policy wise to make it better. Computer models can predict air quality trends. Um, they can help forecast dangerous pollution events, things like that. And then finally, as I was talking about earlier, we can issue poor quality air alerts. We can also change government policy, things of that nature. So it helps us evaluate different interventions that we can provide as well. Okay, so in conclusion, some scary numbers that I think you all need to know about a little bit. First of all, 7 million annual deaths can be contributed to air pollution. So premature deaths, that means the person would have probably lived longer had there been less air pollution in the air. Like we talked about, COPD, heart attacks, stroke, things like that are, if you're susceptible to that, you're even more susceptible in an air polluted environment. 91% of the world population live with air quality below the World Health Organization guidelines, which means pretty much everybody is dealing with some kind of air pollution. And when you're at 91% of the global population, that doesn't leave much out there that isn't under pollution. And then finally, in the United States itself, $4.2 trillion are the economic cost of pollution in the United States. Understanding air pollution through structured questioning helps us take meaningful action. So basically, if we could prevent the air pollution prior to it actually happening, the United States itself could save $4.2 trillion. That's a lot of money. That makes DOGE look light in what it's doing. I mean, if DOGE wants to do some serious saving for the federal government, helping straighten out some of the air pollution and things like that would go a long way. All right, are there any questions? Well, if not, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again next week.